A little bit after 9:30. Welcome, everyone. As Chair of the Board of Selectmen, I'll call this gathering to order. Since I guess most of the time, not today, but most of the time, we'll have a quorum of selectmen here. These will be labeled as official meetings of the board. But my role is really just to call the order and hand it over to our very illustrious leaders in this, Stacy and Mike. So I'll turn it over to you, and good luck. We're all very anxious, and we're all very optimistic.
Great. Thank you, David. I'm not sure how close I need to be to the microphone, so we'll find out probably after the meeting. But I also want to say thank you for coming. Thank you for your participation.
We don't think the mic is on.
The mics, they seem only ceremonial because they are not amplifying our voices. They are only recording for the TV. So you won't hear us through the mic, so if you need us to speak up, just tell us to speak up. You can just use the universal signal, and we'll try to respond.
Thank you.
I'm Mike Domenica, as David said. I started work late last fall with the town on a somewhat extensive list of action items that the board had in front of it. As we went to look at those action items and how to address it became apparent immediately that stakeholder engagement was critical. And the board at that point started this process along with the procurement of consultants and other things. So I've been honored and thankful to be part of that. I do want to say, starting out, having been in this business for 40-plus years now, I don't think I've ever seen as active a community, as committed a community, as engaged as a community, and just the energy is tremendous. So from Stacy's point of view and from mine, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Stacy now, who will go through introductions and lead us through the program today.
Great, thanks. All right. So just a quick overview of the agenda. We didn't make enough copies, I think, for everyone, though we did try to send it out very broadly. And part of the sign-up sheet, if you put your email on there, you will be included in future mailings of agendas and materials and things like that. But we'll talk about later. They'll also all be posted on the website. But let me just walk sort of in brief. The agenda, we start off with just some technical stuff and some introductions, which are quite important. We'll spend a bit of time on the task of the panel. I'm going to beg your indulgence, and I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk a little bit about the theory, some of the theories of collaboration that are going to be underlying the way we're going to work together, and I'm hoping that will be helpful to you. So I'll try not to go into too much depth there, but then we'll really get into the substance a bit and hear about how are we going to tackle, what are the topics we're going to tackle, how are we going to pull them together with the technical scopes of work. Then we're going to take some time for the panel to think about what success looks like, what the pitfalls might be, so that we can really set ourselves up and know in advance how to get there. And we'll do this in a somewhat creative way, but out of this we will try to really draw out criteria that we will use later to evaluate options and alternatives as we develop them. So, and then we'll talk a little bit more about process, communication protocols. There's been a request to also talk more about the operating protocols that you all have in front of you. And so we'll open up that discussion as well as time permits. And then we need to talk about scheduling of meetings. And we will have time for public comment before we close. So just to remind people, the conversation up until the public comment time is really going to be centered here at the table. We may at times open it for alternates or others to pipe in, but in general, we're really going to try and keep it to the table. So most of the time, if I see a hand in the back, I'm going to just ask you to hold it, or to write a note and send it up to someone up here that you feel could help make that point for you. Okay? So, some general ground rules. All right? Speaking one at a time. If you have ideas and you want to make sure that I know that you want to speak and you're on tap to speak, you could go ahead and turn your placard on its side, and then I will know that you're in queue to speak, and then you don't have to sit there, figuring out when to raise your hand and all of those kind of things. So feel free to use that. I think you all know being respectful. Right? We're not going to do any personal attacks. We're not going to try to speak for other people or say what other people think or other people have said. Concise, lots of people. So I hope people will know not to prepare written remarks for these meetings as we go along. It's not that helpful. Anybody who wants to submit something in writing later to make sure it's in the summary, we can do that. But let's try to avoid that in the meeting. Being on task, so we're really going to try and stick to our agenda. We've got to do that because we've got a lot to do. We've also got public meeting kind of rules that keep us focused on the agenda as well. The goal here is to talk all amongst each other and to really listen to each other. So this is interactive, this is participatory. You don't need to direct your comments to us. You can direct your comments to each other, and we're going to really talk to each other. And trying to be constructive. So if there's things that are happening that you don't like, please let us know. But as much as possible to frame it as, here's what I'd like to see happen, rather than here's what I don't like. Okay? So those seem okay? So I am enlisting you now to be my partner in these ground rules, right? Part of my job is enforcing the ground rules, so I'd like you all to empower me in that way, but you are all empowered as well to try and help enforce the ground rules for yourselves and for each other, while still following them respectfully. Okay, so with that, let's go through and do some introductions. I want to keep these short. We're going to have time to get into your expectations and why you're here and what's important to you, so we're not going to do that in the introduction phase, but I think it might be interesting. All of you probably know each other in different ways, but there's probably lots about each other, the sides of each other that you don't know. And I know that there's a lot about each of you that I don't know. So I thought it might be interesting if you want to say, in addition to your name and your affiliation, just one thing that's interesting that others in the room might not know about you. But to do it in 30 seconds, so not a long story. All right? It's a challenge. I'll give you a minute to think. Okay. So I'm going to just start at the end here.
My name is John Kelly. I'm the town administrator here in Orleans, but I'm also the chairman of the Board of Managers for Tri-Town, so sitting at the table today. I'm not sure what I could say other than I do live in town. I live in West Orleans, so I'm very much aware of all of the discussion that's taken place over the years, and I'm certainly looking forward to moving the town forward in this process. Hopefully will get us there. Other than that, I've been here for almost 18 years, my family and I, so I'm certainly engaged in the community.
Good. So, and I know that that's the temptation. Tell us all about your relationship with Orleans and everything else. I want to challenge you to just tell us one little out-of-context tidbit about yourself. There'll be lots of time to tell about your history and relationship to the town.
You get that one.
Thanks. Hot seat. I'm Patty Daly. I'm Deputy Director at the Cape Cod Commission. I'm here because my agency has just finished up our draft of the 208 Cape Cod Area-Wide Water Quality Management Plan, which is what it's called under the Clean Water Act. And I'm sure there'll be an opportunity somewhere in the agenda to talk a little bit about where that's at. And something you might not know about me is that I love live music.
Suzanne Phillips, I like to be called Phil, and I'm here representing the Orleans Shellfish and Waterways Committee. And one thing that probably people don't know is, in one of my jobs, I am known as Cinderella of the Upwella. I have worked for the last 6 years, this is my 7th year, doing propagation work for the Chatham Shellfish Department. And this year I started working for my old boss, who is a oyster farmer down in Barnstable, and he's been doing it almost 40 years. So I spend a lot of my time in upwellers. You didn't know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Depends on you, Cinderella or Phil, or...
No, Phil, please.
My name is Judy Scanlon. I'm representing the Orleans Water Quality Task Force. And something you may not know about me is when I was 4, I lived in Africa for a year.
My name is Bob Rich. I'm the chair of the Orleans Water and Sewer Commission, and I have a PhD in geology.
Gary First, I'm the president of the Orleans Water Alliance, and one thing I guess to share is that since the beginning of the year, as a New Year's resolution, I've started the practice of Tai Chi every morning because I'm such a multitasker and have trouble focusing. It requires 100% attention and focus. So at least for the 20 minutes I do it.
Sid Snow, President of Snow's Home and Garden. I'll be representing the Orleans Chamber as well as the general business community. And let's see, I've born and raised in Orleans, and I remember at 10 years old I used to dive for quahogs in Town Cove, and I could sit at 10 feet on top of the surface and actually see the bottom. Today I dive down within a foot of the bottom and you still can't see the bottom.
My name is Ed Daly. Today I represent the peer review committee, and I guess one thing maybe people don't know, I spent 10 years in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia and other countries, and if we need any Arabic translations, I'll be happy to
Inshallah, it can come in.
Inshallah. Inshallah, yeah.
Judith Bruce, I'm representing the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Planning Committee, now defunct. And I think probably people don't know that I spent a year working for Major League Baseball.
I'm Dave Dunford, the chairman of the Board of Selectmen here in Orleans. It's my 10th year as a selectman here. I think probably most of you know me pretty well. What is taking up more of my time, and the selectman role does take up an awful lot of time, I think, as most friends. But I'm, happily have just had my 5th grandchild come along, and it was wonderful holding a 2-week-old little boy during the first week of this month. So that's going to be taking up more and more of my time. Those 5, very special.
Alan McLennan, selectman for the last year. I joined my wife over 50 years ago and summered at her property in Nauset Heights, and my usual assignment was to keep the cesspool operating.
That says something. I'm sure yours.
I'm Doug Fromm. I'm president of Orleans Can, a citizens group that was formed in late 2012. I first visited and fell in love with Cape Cod in August of 1964 and have been here most years since. One thing you might not know is I do love classical organ music and country music. Those two.
But not at the same time.
Not
What?
At the same time?
Never tried that.
I'm Joy Cumming. I'm an architect here in town. I'm working I'm very actively involved in the Orleans Community Partnership and very happy to be representing them here. I am a singer-songwriter and passionate about music of all kinds as well. And I love live music, too. So.
I'm starting to spot up.
Hi, I'm Gordon Smith, representing the Orleans Taxpayers Association. I was raised on a dairy farm in western Massachusetts. First came to the Cape in 1948. I don't remember it that well, but I was here, caught my first bass in Town Cove in 1952.
I'm Jim McCauley. I'm representing the Orleans Pond Coalition, and I do kind of odd jobs, one of which was to help launch the History Channel.
Joshua Larson, Vice Chairman, Orleans Finance Committee, and I'm here to follow the money, so to speak. One thing people may not know about me is that I speak Russian fluently, and I lived in Moscow for 17 years and know all of the Russian bad guys you hear about on TV.
I'm Steve Phillips. I'm the Vice Chair of the Orleans Conservation Commission, and I've built my own post and beam barn, which I use as a workshop.
I'm Karen Simpson from EPA. Many of you know Rob Adler, so I'm here filling in for him. He couldn't be here today. One thing about me that many may probably guess but don't know is that I play volleyball all the time.
I'm Jenny Iannini. I'm representing the Brewster Conservation Commission, and I am a duplicate bridge addict.
My name is Sue Levin. I'm the planner for the town of Brewster, and I'm the town of Brewster's representative here. I also oversee the town's water planning efforts. One thing, actually, everyone in my office knows about me, but people here might not, is that I ride horses twice a week before coming to work in the morning.
You take a shower.
I'm Sandy Bang. I'm the liaison from Eastham. Two things, because I can say them quickly. I came from Eastham, where I lived for 28 years. And Eastham was the first Superfund site in the state of Massachusetts. Second, like Mary, I'm too much of a multitasker, and I do yoga to help me with that.
I'm Brian Dudley from Mass DEP. When I'm not in Orleans dealing with wastewater, I spend a lot of time on stage at the county players.
Well, great. That's wonderful. And I am hopeful that we will all get a chance to know each other.
And you two have to...
Oh, us?
Welcome to Orleans.
Mike Domenica, as I said, one of my interests is old British cars. Don't ask me why, but I have one that was built the year Mr. Fromm moved to Orleans, 1964. It's 50 years old. An old Triumph TR4. Tooling around in.
Great. I'm Stacy Smith, and I am a senior mediator at the Consensus Building Institute. Some, but not all of you know that my former career was as a high school teacher, and I taught high school kids that all came from other countries. You had to score below the 20th percentile on your English language test to get into my school. It was a small public school in New York City. So if I seem really entertaining and I move around a lot, it's because in my old career, nobody understood a word I was saying. All right, so I'm going to give a quick overview of the process, and this is where I beg your indulgence. It's a little bit, I'm drawing on some of my training materials, so some of the things I do involve capacity building and training groups to collaborate and negotiate effectively. We used to start off all our processes with training, and we found that stakeholders tended to feel like that was a bit patronizing. So I apologize if this is patronizing, but I really do think it's helpful, because when I think about some of my most successful collaborations, training, just basic introduction is to the theory of why we're doing things the way we're doing them, seem to really pay off. So bear with me. So to do effective public decision making, there's really three pieces that we're trying to do. We've got the process, getting the process right, transparent, clear, all of the things that we tried to do in those operating protocols. We've got the people, the political, the stakeholder groups, all of that stuff. We worked hard to make sure we had a good representative group, both of stakeholders and also of really knowledgeable liaisons and people who are going to be in charge of regulating or implementing or otherwise really playing a key role. And then we've got the information, the data, the technical stuff, and we have really got to pull all of these together. Mostly that's Mike's job, but we're going to work on that together to really make sure that we marry the process, the people, and the information effectively together over the next year. So what is consensus building? Right? It's a process that brings together the key stakeholder interests, right? And to identify what's important, we kind of got most of that, but we're going to do more to really hone in on what are the key topics, to really understand what's important to all of the people at the table, what are the interests and the values that you bring. We're going to try and create options that are better than the sum of their parts, that actually create more ways to meet people's interests and values than any one of us might have done on our own. And then we get to collaboratively evaluate and decide on those options, right? And research over the last 20 years, 25 years, as this field has evolved, has found that not only does this get this thing passed through the political thing, but it makes decisions that are actually wiser. They're actually more durable, right? They actually, because we are adding all of this knowledge and input, we actually get much better decisions that last longer, that are smarter, right? So here's 3 characteristics we're really going to try and embody, and I think we tried to do that in the way we designed this. It's got to be inclusive, it's got to be informed, and it's got to be deliberative, right? And we're going to really build on all of that as we go. And if there's a time at any point you feel like we're missing something, we're not being sufficiently inclusive, we're not bringing enough information, we're not getting enough deliberation, right? You are empowered to bring that forward as well. So I'm not really going to go too much into this, but we're drawing on a very rich theory that we have called the mutual gains approach, but it's been called the win-win approach, or the getting to yes approach, or any of these types of things. And anything you find these days that's really a collaboration, negotiation, multi-group partnership kind of theory draws on the same theory. Like the people in this field are not really in dispute very much about what works. We all have our own style and our own way of framing it, but we pretty much have common views about what the core concepts are, right? Getting away from positions, which are the things we say we want at the very surface, and getting to why. Why is that important? What's really, really important underlying those things, right? Understanding what our alternatives are. I think we have a good sense here. There's a real good reason we're all here together, right? It hasn't worked to try and do this on our own. Inventing good options. Before we have to evaluate them, before we have to commit to them, we can really be creative, open up that space. We're going to develop the criteria for evaluating those options together, right? We're going to try and prepare for what we like to call predictable surprises. All the things that are kind of likely to go wrong later if we don't attend to them now. Use contingent agreements. So a contingent agreement is an if-then. Right? And we're going to use that quite a bit using adaptive management. Right? And self-enforcing, joint monitoring, and dispute resolution, we're building all of that in as we go. Right? So at the end, we're really trying to get to unanimity. We're hoping we can get there. If we need to, we're looking for things that people can all live with. Right? So you can live with it, that at least we're addressing your core basic interests and values, even if there's not everything in there that you love, right? And for that reason, we're not going to try and decide on one piece, close the book, move to the next piece, close the book. We're actually going to talk about all these different components. We're going to leave it open. with options, and we're going to come back at the end and we're going to try and package it up. Because it might be that you're willing to accept your not necessarily favorite option in one area in order to get your favorite option in the area you care more about, right? So that's really the theory behind this. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about information, right? And technical studies and all of that. So there was a time that we thought, scientists in particular, thought all we have to do is inform people. They need to be informed, they need to be educated, and then they'll all agree and we'll be good to go, right? So we're pretty down that road now where we realize it actually doesn't work that way, right? And this is no blame to any individual person who has these types of responses. It's kind of hardwired in. This is how psychology works. We actually find out that it's not true that we all base decisions in some really highly rational cognitive way. That's actually not how the human brain works, right? So I've been getting very interested in this field called identity protective cognition. It's also been called assimilation bias. It's gone through all kinds of names. But there's all kinds of research now. There's actually a center at Yale that's entire purpose is studying this issue. And there's researchers all over the country, probably the world, studying this issue. And it's basically, all the studies seem to find that even when you give people really good information, they don't change their minds. They actually get more entrenched. The opposite thing happens. Right? So if we were to set up this process where we just get the experts to come in and tell you what the reality is, it's actually not going to change your minds. It's not going to work. Right? Because what happens is if you were originally predisposed to one view, if they present that view, you're going to say, yeah, I like that. If you were already predisposed against that view, chances are likely that you're going to find all the reasons why that view that they've just presented is wrong. Right? And this is borne out in research study after research study. Right? And in fact, we think, oh, well, maybe the less sophisticated people do that. No, actually, the more sophisticated you are, the higher your level of knowledge, information, education on those issues, the more likely you are to be subject to this effect. Okay, that's really what all the research shows. What's also one of my favorite studies that I found really interesting is people are also more likely to accept an idea that goes against their general ideological perspectives. They're more likely to accept that idea if they're told that the idea is being espoused by someone they trust, right? And vice versa. If an idea that's totally consistent with the values that they've told us they have, if we present them that idea but tell them that it's an idea coming from the other side, whoever the other side is, they're going to dislike that idea, right? So identity plays a big role in the research that we've shown, right? So if we bring in an expert that you already don't trust, right, and that expert just tells you stuff, that's going to affect how you think about it, right? So this is a big problem for public policy decision-making in a collaborative setting, right? Because what happens is science just becomes a tool. Technical information just becomes a tool. And we each arm ourselves with the scientific evidence that supports our views, and we trot it out there, and we believe in it really strongly, right? As well we should, because that's how our brains work, right? But what happens is we're not convincing anybody. We've lost the ability to use the science, if we ever had it. We lose the ability to use it to actually bring people together around an issue. And that's what we are going to work to overcome. All right, so how are we going to do that? Well, the first thing is the research actually shows that when I tell you all of this, that could happen. Right? So if you don't have to believe me, you can go, I can give you sources of all these research studies. But if you accept that this is true, that your mind is inclined to work in this way, it can actually help you be more conscious about the way that you respond to the information and the science that's brought before you. Another piece is, if you're in a setting where you feel like it's fair, there's some fundamentally fair process going on, that can really help you step back from that protective cognition idea as well. The third thing we found, that research has found that really seems to help, is building trust in relationships. So the less we see each other as other who is out to push ideas on me that I don't like and that are here to harm me, the more we can actually get to know each other as human beings. And that's why I asked to do the introductions the way I did. And I think we may want to build more of this in. Because the more you can each know, wow, that's a human being and they have ideas and they're not, and I can be open to what they have to say, the more we can do that, the better off we're going to be at being able to move together with science and technical information. And lastly, we're going to do this process called joint fact-finding, right? And that's what this panel is set up to do. And that is, we're going to do the science together. We're going to do the technical stuff together as much as we can. That is, you're going to be able to weigh in on what's being studied, how it's being studied, how it's being analyzed, right? Not maybe every detail, but to the extent we need to do that, we're going to bring it to all of you instead of just presenting and going away and saying accept it all, right? Any questions about this? I'm sorry, I'm being very lectury. Yes.
Yeah, you talked earlier about outcomes, and your general point was that we're seeking an outcome. At what point do we agree what we want that outcome to be? Is it a design of a wastewater management system? Is it an agreement that we're going to build a sewer or not? I mean, at what point are we going to agree specifically what the outcome is going to be?
You want to answer that, Mike?
I would. This will be an iterative process, which will go, I have a flow chart we'll go through that will kind of lead us through the steps we'll follow, very much consistent with what Stacy's saying in terms of a collaborative process where we start here and continually work it down through fact-finding and the kinds of behavior and thinking that Stacy's talking about to be something where everyone at the end is saying, yeah, that's the right thing. In general, that's it, but we'll get into some more detail.
Any other questions on this? Okay, well, thank you for indulging that little lecture. So with that, I want to put out a proposal on how we're going to handle information. So, as I said, for technical tasks, stakeholders will weigh in on the questions, on the methodologies, on the sources of information, all of those things. Here, we're going to bring our technical team in. They're going to share with you. You're going to share with them. We're going to have a lot of engagement and back and forth. If you have sources, research, information, ideas that you think should be considered, right, you're welcome to share those to the technical, with the technical team through us, right? They're not necessarily going to do everything everybody asks, right? Because we do have a limit to our scope of work. But we want to make sure that we have that channel of communication open. However, what we don't want to happen is that panel members get up and present their own technical information, right? Because that's where we start to get into the adversarial science, or the potential for adversarial science. So my proposal is that the only way that a stakeholder or a panel member gets up to present something is if everybody on the panel thinks that's a good idea. I think it's unlikely that the panel's all going to think that's a good idea for the stakeholders, right? The liaisons, on the other hand, we may very well want to ask to present to us. For example, the Cape Cod Commission on their 208 plan. We might very much want them to come up. We might very much want, you know, one of the town representatives from the neighboring towns to tell us about what's going on in their town, right? Or for DEP, or for the seashore, right? So it's quite likely that we will ask the liaisons, as a panel, we will ask the liaisons to share something with us that may have a technical nature, less likely, I think, for stakeholders. In terms of, I have articles, I have whatever I want everybody to read about the latest research on shellfish or the latest whatever on this technology or that technology, we're going to have to decide as a group how we do that, right? And I think the earlier the better, right? And I don't know if we have time to necessarily do that today, but I think what I might do is put together a little online poll to get us started as a group between this meeting and the next, and get your initial thoughts about how you think we as a panel should handle articles that you want each other to have access to or to read. Because it could get, I've seen it devolve. And I'm just trying to, it may be great, it may be no problem, but it's just better to be prepared. It's one of those possible predictable surprises that we may have. Oh, and that's for you. So that's the overview on process. We'll get more into the operating protocols, the communication protocols, all that stuff a little later in the meeting. But that's just, wanted to give you sort of an orientation to how we are operating together and the premise behind the panel. Is that helpful? Yeah? Okay.
Great. Thank you. Give me a heads up.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Stacy. One thing I've noticed working through this is being an engineer for a lot of years, leading stakeholder processes as an engineer, it's great to work with a professional. So thankful for that. But I have to tell you a little story about a teacher, Sunday school teacher, who teaching a first grade class, gets all the kids around in front of her, and they're all on the floor. And she's going to teach them in this class about the evils of alcohol. And she has this little demonstration, and she picks up this glass of vodka and holds it up in front of the kids and says, "Now, children, I want you to watch this carefully." And she tells them what it is and takes a worm and drops it into the glass and of vodka, and the worm drops to the bottom and twitches a few times and rolls over, twitches a couple more times, and lays there lifeless. And the kids' eyes are all kind of really glued into this. And she says, "Now watch this." And she takes a glass of clean water and puts another worm in it, and the worm goes to the bottom and obviously enjoys it, frolicking around and just healthy as ever. And the kids are watching this with wide eyes. And she says, "Now, children, what does this tell you about the evils of alcohol?" And one little guy raises his hand and says, "If you drink, you won't get worms." So all the communication in the world doesn't help in some cases. So I thought, just as I start going through some of the project management components of this, that it might be good to give you some idea of my philosophy as I've seen it worked out in projects over the years, programs like this, water resources type stuff in my career, and how it applies to Orleans, and some thinking and some thoughts that I've had. Number one, and this isn't always the case, but by and large, when a community or city comes together to develop a critical plan, the first plan out the door is DOA. Why is that? It raises more issues. As you start into it, you start to think. You have a scope of work, you have a plan, everything, you start into it, and all of a sudden, all these issues start coming up. And the problem with something like water quality in Orleans, in complex estuaries, in a town like Orleans with all kinds of estuaries, all kinds of ponds, is extremely complex. So as you go into it, you raise more questions. You can't solve them fast enough. You have a scope of work, generally mechanical scope of work, traditional technologies come to bear first. You go along. What happens? You run out of time. You run out of money. At the end, you put the best plan together. You do a quick cost analysis, and you put it out there,
and all of a sudden, there's still all these questions on the table. That happens probably 9 out of 10 cases that I've seen. Not through any fault of the participants, but this is just a complex area. And Patty's sitting there saying, well, I hope it's the exception for the 208. However, keep in mind, when was the 208 done? 1978. What did it accomplish? As Mr. Snow said, not much in a lot of ways. It sat on shelves, it was pushed aside so that people could get to construction grants, as Brian knows, construction grants program to build secondary treatment facilities, which was the right thing to do. But here we are 40 years later saying to ourselves, now what do we do? And the 208 now is, okay, now we've learned a lot, let's pick up on it and go forward. So that's one perspective about this. The other thing that I want to just discuss at the beginning, which is a common question we've dealt with in Orleans. What's the status of the CWMP? And I think as we talk about this, you got to realize one thing. There's gutters on both sides of the road. You can say, it's gone, push it aside, forget it. That's one extreme that we have to be careful of. The other extreme is to say, that's it. We got it, it's there, we can tweak it here and there, but it's in place, it's approved, that's where we're going to be. Where we are, and it's somewhat hard to describe, is right in the middle. It's a framework document, it's the document of record, DEP's been through it, it's got a DRI approval, it's got a MEPA approval. However, we're sitting here with all things on the table. We want to go back to it and say, okay, we know a lot more now than we knew somewhere between 6 and 10 years ago. We have more data. When you think about it, think about how the field has changed in 10 years. Adaptive management was a novel idea 10 years ago. I remember talking about it in Philadelphia. I was involved in Philadelphia in the late 90s on their green technology program, watershed-based green. It was a novel idea then. Now it's something we understand we have to do. Think of all the data we have. Think of the technologies we have that have come along. So we're sitting here saying we have a CWMP, we have approvals, but we have to now look at it, optimize it, customize it, revise it, sanitize it, do everything we want to it to make it what really works for Orleans, what's the right plan. We have the opportunity to do that. As we'll talk, we have to work with DEP, the Commission, and others to do it, but that's where we are on that. Any questions? Retaining regulatory progress to date, just talked about that. We have an umbrella. That umbrella's hopefully pretty big. I look at Brian because DEP is a major player here, EPA to a lesser degree, the Commission, but we want to work under that umbrella, and we're being told there's a lot of flexibility in there. It's not just, I hate to use the term big pipes. I worked at MWRA, I shouldn't say that here in Orleans, 25 years ago, and we planned a tunnel under the city, a 30-foot diameter tunnel. That was a big pipe. But it's all relative. This is big on the Cape. So, but we want to engineer under that umbrella. There's a lot of flexibility, and that's where we have to work under the guidelines Stacy put forward to bring that to bear. We're filling gaps and assessing options. The action items the selectmen had 6 months ago were well conceived. They were the things that really needed to be addressed to go forward. As you look at them, they need to be integrated, linked. I like to look at this, as I've said to the selectmen at meetings in the past, as a wagon wheel. We're trying to get to the hub. We want to get to the hub, but all of those spokes have to come in at the right time, with the right information, at the right place, in the right stakeholder environment to give the right projects and program so that this wheel works. and that's where we are. How to use the 208 is critical. Again, there's gutters on both sides of the road. The 208 takes big steps forward. It gives us technologies. It looks at the financial, looks at the regulatory. However, it did it Cape-wide in a year. We have to now take it and download it to Orleans. Orleans isn't starting from scratch, though, so it's kind of nice. We have the 208, we have the data we have here, we have a CWMP that provides a lot of basic information. We're not starting from scratch doing block sizes and GIS and stuff like that. We have a lot of that stuff. So it's how do we link with that 208 to take maximum advantage of it. Addressing uncertainty, really the adaptive approach is the vehicle here. We're not going to solve everything this year. No way. We're going to solve some things, though. Whatever we still have uncertainty on, wherever we can't get together and say, this is what we feel really comfortable moving ahead with, we have to define the uncertainty and then define how to resolve that uncertainty. Not just throw it aside, not just say we're not going to consider it. Come up with a plan for how to close that gap of uncertainty. That's what is in the adaptive plan. We'll talk about what's in there in a few minutes. Building flexibility. If you have an adaptive plan in uncertainty, but you're going to do something, that something has to be flexible enough so that a year later, when you get more monitoring data, when you understand how something's performing, when you get the results of a pilot study, you can now adapt your program to fit it. So flexibility is important. It'll be really critical with whatever plan we come up with as a core. Financial engineering, kind of a mix of things, but most cost estimating financial analysis for CWMP work, historically, by definition, by necessity, is done at the end. You do the plans, you do the cost estimating, at the end you say, here's the plan, now let's see how we're going to afford it. We can't do that. We have to start with the financial model at the beginning, and we have to see what the knobs on the radio are, and we have to engineer this program financially. We have a lot of knobs on that radio that haven't been looked at yet. This is probably, I think, one of the biggest opportunities for the town, is to really look at public-private partnerships, look at different financing methods, look at design, build, operate. That's one of the things we need to do as we go forward. Nothing is affordable, frankly, if you don't do that. Recognizing regional synergies in economics, that's going to be very important. You have 3 towns here. Other than septic tanks in Tri-Town, there is no wastewater facilities. I look down the road 30 years, I have a hard time envisioning 3 towns all with a wastewater plant, or all with this, or all with that, all with wastewater administrations, all with wastewater directors. This 3 towns is a small area. There's got to be synergies here that we can work out together and make them work. It's going to take some hard engineering, trust, and all the things we've been talking about. Lastly, constructive public engagement. Stacy's been through that. This is a great opportunity. I mean, to have Consensus Building Institute here, Stacy here, and have the enthusiasm and the perspective that you bring to the table where you're ready to sit down and, okay, now let's really work together to do the right thing. That's great. I think this is a good process.
Can I say one more thing about that? I think also, as you read the operating protocols, constructive public engagement is part of your job, because you are all representatives. So you have to be emissaries of this work into the communities so that we are not just the 25 people at this table. We are really reaching in and affecting and hearing from and bringing the voices of the town as a whole.
I want to take just a quick few minutes to go through the scope of work, just in outline form. Most of you, I think, have seen it. How many haven't seen the scope of work that we've been procuring a consultant to undertake, and I'll tell you a minute about the process. How many have not seen that? Okay. It will be on the website, which is in place, thanks to Sarah, who's not here, and Myra. Yeah, Sarah's here. It's in place, and it will start being populated. It has nice subfolders, and that will be the place to look, and we'll send out the link.
It'll be on.
It'll be on the link. Okay, great. With regard to where we are in the procurement process, 5 proposals were submitted. The town doesn't have a lot of control over who submits. 5 proposals were submitted. The town selection committee narrowed it down to 3, had 3 interviews. 1 firm stood out in the written proposals, did a great job at the interview, and was preferred. That was GHD. We're in negotiations with them now. John and I have been working with them to fine-tune some financial terms and conditions in the contract. That should be ready to go by the end of the week. One of the reasons we went through a qualifications-based submittal is with a qualifications-based submittal, you can negotiate a lot more than you can with a full proposal when you have a cost estimate that you're going to stick to. Negotiations allows you to say, okay, boy, we'd really like that, but we need more of this, less of that, we want this person to do that. One of the things we did in that process with GHD is look at their financial team. They had a very good financial team. They had a fellow named Chris Woodcock, who's worked, started in Massachusetts, works all over the country now, senior level, excellent financial analyst, financial modeler. He was subbing to a firm called Raftellus, a national firm. We thought, that's good, but they're in North Carolina or Chicago or somewhere. We want something more local. So what we did is talk to one of the other teams and said, hey, can we use your financial consultant? And they said, sure. So we have Doug Gardner here, who's kind enough to come today on his own time to do the financial analysis working with Chris Woodcock. Doug is from Harwichport, has a firm called Pioneer Consulting Group, has worked for towns on the Cape, off the Cape, southeastern Massachusetts, Rhode Island, doing exactly the kind of stuff we want. And he and the stakeholder group will be working pretty heavily in this financial engineering going forward. So that's where that procurement starts. Just going through the scope, we're not looking to generate brand new information on this en masse, you might say. A lot of the basic information is in place. There's gaps, there's change, stuff like that we have to address. But we've asked them to pull together the information, summarize it, prepare a bibliography, and have a library along with an annotated summary of that we can look at and say, okay, here's the information we have going forward. It will change. There's going to be new information added to it continually. Regulatory assessment and coordination is a key part of it. Septage and food waste market study. We started out this with the scope of work that was pretty encompassing. Patty's told me that the Cape Cod Commission is now looking at the Upper Cape in terms of a septage marketing study. So we'll be working with the Commission to dovetail these together so we're not overlapping. If our scope generates information early that's helpful to them, we'll provide it, and vice versa, so that we get a good picture of the whole Cape. Timing will be important. We have to talk through. Food waste is an issue we want to address here. There's opportunities there that firms like Veolia, Waste Management are jumping all over because there's money in it. If there's money in it, and we're building a septage facility that handles high-strength, high-organic waste, is there something there? There's a lot of towns looking at this kind of technology around the country. There's one facility in New York City, actually built right down Lower Manhattan, that's doing it. So, something we want to look at. Tri-town plant options, obviously, very critical. Will drive not only the form and content of the plan, but also the timing of it. We have some deadlines we have to be very cognizant of going forward. Decentralized treatment disposal site investigations, very important. Not only picking up the 26 sites that we looked at a while back, looking at some new sites that have come on the table, as well as looking for a disposal site for the Tri-Town plant, if we keep it in existence, if it keeps going. Specialized assessment. We have certain, what you might call technical focused tasks we really have to look at. Horizontal directional drill is one of them. Septic tank effluent pumping and gravity systems is another. There's probably a couple of others in there we have to look at. We don't want to make them the focal point of the effort. These are almost sidebars. We want a real experienced, focused team looking at these, led by the consultant, but selecting the right staff from the consultant's organization to do it, so that we get current, state-of-the-art, progressive thinking on whether these technologies work. Keep in mind, though, that historically, and for good reasons, horizontal directional drill was looked at during a design phase. Sometimes not even during the design phase. It was the contractor that came in and said, look, you said to do it this way, I can save you money, do it this way. So even if we lay it out in our specs that we recommend it be done this way, the contractor may do it another way and save money. So we're going to look at it. It will inform our cost estimates, not necessarily how the job is actually constructed. Maybe a lot of questions on these, but we'll get into that. Non-traditional nitrogen control technology evaluations. There's a lot of things to look at here. A lot of work been done. One of the reasons GHD came to the top is a particular sub they have named SIA Carplus. Have any of you worked with SIA? I know the commission has. SIA's from Falmouth. Very, very sharp lady. Has been working for the last 2-3 years with Falmouth on their innovative, alternative, non-traditional technology initiatives, including aquaculture, PRBs, eco-toilets, fertilizer, stormwater. And she never seen anyone go up a learning curve faster and also dig into the details better. So I think it's really nice having her on the team. Financial model and analysis, we've talked about. Adaptive management is a critical part of it, the monitoring, pilots, and additional studies. One thing that I hadn't thought about, but in a process like this, I think we need to consider, and we call it low fruit. As we go through something like this, it could be that next month, next meeting, something pops up and says, we say, we got to do this. There's a PRB opportunity on the table to get grant or money to do a PRB. We may say, why wait until May of next year? Let's pursue that right now. Spin it off, produce a separate track for it, and do it. There's going to be things like that that we, on a program like this, when we're thinking and talking and integrating and there's synergy, those kind of things will pop up. And that's when you know you got a good program. When the light bulbs come on and everybody, yes, let's go on it. And then that informs us earlier than it otherwise would have. So big part is the adaptive management. Public engagement support is part of the consultant contract. They thought they were going to do it. They had a good sub, Regina Villa, who's worked on the Cape. Great. I worked with them for the last 30 years. Great people. But I think we have Stacy. They're available to support both technically and if we need support on public engagement in some fashion, we can do that. So they're tearing their hair out, though, because GHD in the negotiations, all consultant firms, you know, they're for profit. So they're looking and saying, okay, what's the scope? What am I going to do? How much am I going to charge? And we're saying, well, we'll determine it as we go forward. We're going to say this is an interactive process. We have a plan now, but this group may come up next week and say, hey, let's look at more detail on this. We don't need to look at that anymore. And so they're sitting there saying, how do I deal with this? And at the interview, for those of you who were there, we went through this, and you could see them, the wheels kind of turning, and they're saying, oh my gosh, how do we staff it? You know, how do we move all these parts around and all this kind of stuff? And at the end, I asked them the question, are you ready for this? Because this is going to be a challenge to the consultants. And just a word about consultants being one. None of them are perfect. None of them. They all have strengths, they all have weaknesses. The job we have, me as project manager, you as stakeholders, is to ask the right questions and direct the consultants to serve, answer the questions we have, bring the data to the table, do the analysis we ask them to do. Not let them go for 3-4 months and come back and tell us what you found. We have to engage with them. We have to direct them. So this is going to be a very interactive process. We have to make sure we get the right people, the right scopes. We have to follow up on it. It's detail work. The devil's in the details. So I think we have a consultant that's big enough and small enough to do the kinds of things we're asking. Yes, they designed the Chatham system. Big pipe. Centralized. But Chatham had what percent grant money? Big. I think it was 85, something like that. You know, when you have 85% grant money, it does influence decisions. It may not have been the consultant at all. So they have a step-stake system operating in Chatham. So what we need to do is get the right people, make sure that they're doing their homework and analyzing. And what Stacy said, you know, we'll decide what data they get. From an engineer's perspective, from a project manager's perspective, if we have information, give it to us. We're going to make sure they get it, and all of us together will make sure they follow up on it. That they consider it, they have response to it. If they don't use it, tell us why. If you do use it, tell us why. So that's very, very critical. We're not going to push information aside and say we're not going to consider that. We'll bring it in, but it has to come in through the right process, fairly from all sides. Final revised CWMP. This was a significant point in the negotiations with GHD. They wanted to produce a bunch of memos. They could see this thing unfolding and say, oh, well, yeah, we can answer that, we can answer this, but we need to bring it together. We need to bring it together into a document, whether it's called a revised CWMP, a revised CWRMP, whatever we want to call it. We want a document that is the consensus of this group, that brings all this information together, puts the right things in place, and is ready to go forward with the Commission, DEP, and others through a regulatory process that we define along the way. So that's an important part of this. GHD's on board with that. Questions on scope?
So you talked a little bit about the picking of GHD and the relationship with Chatham. And there is a perception, and very well could be a misconception, that because they were involved in a big centralized system, that by picking this consultant, it's sort of a foregone conclusion that that's where they're going to go. Can you speak a little bit about their experience in when you evaluated them and when you decided to go with them, on their experiences with other technologies besides?
Yes. Yeah. They are a big international firm, a big national firm. They acquired Stearns and Wheeler 10, 15 years ago. I forget how long ago. Stearns and Wheeler has been doing green technology, innovative alternative stuff all over the Northeast. Whenever you get a big firm like this, having been with several of them, there's pockets in every firm that do everything. They'll have projects, and they do, where it's all green technology, nothing else. That's all they consider, period. That's all they're doing. And so a lot of the stormwater management work they're doing is exactly that. There's no wastewater pipes, there's no plants, it's all stormwater infiltration swales, phytoremediation, constructed wetlands, all this type of stuff. They had those qualifications, they have them, we have to access them.
And the scope of work talks specifically about all those things.
Yes, absolutely.
That's helpful.
Undertaking a large-scale project like this involves an enormous amount of risk, no matter what we do. And I think it would be extremely helpful if we could build into the scope of work an explicit
risk register
definition of saying that at every stage of the process, the consultant needs to explicitly say what's the financial risk, what's the engineering risk, what's the technology risk.
That is a great point.
So
That's
that
a
we
great
can
point.
have a
Yeah,
clear
I worked in the UK for some time, and the Commonwealth, British Commonwealth is big on that. Australia, New Zealand. The risk register is the first thing you do. They manage projects based on risk, and that's important that we do here. It's in the scope, small item in the scope, that we don't do it that much in the U.S., but it's a powerful tool. What I think how it's best done is real time, as we go along, as we talk about all of the decisions we're making, look at the risks. The other part that goes with that is the opportunities. In the UK, they have pain share, gain share. Anybody heard about that? If the project saves money, the consultant gets part of it and the client gets part of it. If it loses money, the consultant gets part of it, client gets part of it. So they're linked together in a partnership, and that plus or minus has a component. The risk management has an opportunity matrix, because if you can do something better, not just avoid risk, but actually do something better that adds value, that's another part of a risk register that we tend to downplay. So what are we watching out for, but also what can we do better? And I think it would behoove us to pay more attention to that as we go forward. That's a good point. Anything else?
Mike, during the TOA process, we, I think, have started developing the models that we're going to use in doing this evaluation, and we started talking about monitoring. Are we going to take steps to coordinate with the Commission to assure that at the end of the day we're left with a CAPE model and a CAPE strategy on monitoring rather than our own tailored version of the model?
Absolutely, yes. That's a good point as well. I understand, Patty, maybe you can say something about this, but the Commission is talking to the state about resources to take the lead on monitoring. I'll give Patty a minute to say something about that. My thinking about that is that's critical that the Commission, on behalf of the towns, put together extremely rigorous protocols, well-defined, scientifically defensible protocols for the several levels of monitoring we have to do. We have to do monitoring of the technologies at one level. How does a PRB work? Looking upstream and downstream. How efficient is it? We have to then, at the other end, look at the actual performance in the water body. Are we making a difference in that water body? And in between the PRB and the water body, there's several other things. Innovative alternative systems need to be monitored. What are the protocols for that? And what's the general specifications for those programs? However, the Commission, I doubt, is going to do that for every watershed to the detail that we're going to need that going forward. So part of GHD's scope is to take what the Commission puts together, again, timing is a key issue here, and customize that and apply it to Orleans. So we have something that's theoretically correct, but practically applicable and affordable, because it can get very expensive. Anything else?
Patty, did you want to say?
Yeah, Patty.
No, I think that's well put. Clearly, as these non-traditional technologies get rolled out, there's going to need to be discussions with the regulatory agencies, DEP and us, about what level of monitoring is going to be required to ensure that we're meeting our water quality goals. I think it came out pretty clear during the stakeholder sessions as well, though, that as a region, we'd all benefit if we can agree on some monitoring protocols and share information with each other more readily, perhaps, than we have, and that should save us all time and money.
Exactly. A couple of other things that are spinning around the main contract. The utility survey. We're about ready to sign contract on that, have a notice to proceed to SNC, Survey Mapping Consultants, to put together the utility survey for the central part of Orleans. Big part of that is getting much more detailed information on the larger downtown on-site systems, where they are, what kind they are, how old they are, whether they're operating, especially horizontal information, so we can tell whether something like steg systems will work, how much it's going to cost to connect them, where we would connect them. If there's opportunities for cluster systems downtown, we'll certainly look at them. If someone wants to give up, an acre of land for a wastewater plant downtown, fantastic. If the abutters like that, fantastic. We'll look at it. Give it a fair shot. That's where you all have to weigh in. Landfill plume assessment, we had a draft scope a couple of months ago. We put it in place. We were looking primarily at nitrogen regarding the impacts on Town Cove. The question came up, as long as we're doing it, should we look at more than nitrogen? And then we started developing the scope for this project, and we said, that's a piece of this. We have that scope. The solution to it could be part of this problem. If we're looking, maybe a PRB will work there. Maybe there's no problem. So we have a scope of work to look not just at nitrogen, but everything coming out of it. If there is a problem, what are the options? And can it link then with this program down the road, probably 3 or 4 months from now, to say, yes, if we're doing this in this area, then let's tackle the landfill at the same time. Namskakit Marsh Restoration Protection. That obviously is a huge goal of the town, the protection and restoration of that marsh. That is a subject of a parallel activity where we're putting together a stakeholder panel, discipline, broadly based, to look at the ecological, hydrogeological, geochemistry aspects of it to try to get the best experience from a variety of sources to say, here's what we really need to know on Namskakit to know what to do there to protect it. Could be stormwater, could be a lot of different things. We're doing that in parallel. We've separated it from the project because of the CERM, the concern over freshwater. There's significant freshwater going in, volume-wise, maybe not to the whole estuary, but where it's coming in at the headwaters, it could be significant. So we put that aside, separated it from the Tri-Town facility. We're looking for other sites for Tri-Town disposal. If we can find them, fantastic. That takes one of the questions away from Namskakit, but that's a separate task going on. We're looking at tying that in somewhere in the late September, early October timeframe, which would be a scope of work to say, here's the additional work we need to do there to really understand it. Aquaculture survey and case studies. We're going to look at aquaculture as part of the options here, the non-traditional options. But there's also a lot of work been done. Alan has been talking about this. It's one of his priorities, and I'm sure it is for others. What is being done in other places? What's the information coming out of that to create a library, so to speak, that we can continually draw on going forward? That started before the consultant came on, thinking through that, so that's running separately. Rock Creek Harbor, and Cedar Pond, obviously a major issue. The use attainability, use change is on the table. We're thinking about it. We've had discussions with DEP. one-way discussions. They're not willing to talk about it yet, and, you know, from a regulator's point of view, you can see, you know, here we are sitting talking about a plan for what we're going to do for nitrogen management all over town, all this big plan, and you're saying you want me to change the use designation before you do your plan. So they're saying to Orleans, look at stormwater management, look at fertilizers, look at Cedar Pond, resolve the issue on brackish versus fresh versus salt, and then, after you've looked at everything, then come back and talk to us about a use change. I think that is reasonable. So that's somewhat on the back burner, although the Cedar Pond decision is critical, and that has to be moved forward. But the use attainability and use change for Rock Harbor Creek itself, especially at the marina, is something that is not going to have really much activity this next year. Do you agree? Oh, what else did I miss there? Oh, Tri-Town plant, as I said before, the critical issues there related to Tri-Town. We have to make decisions by next spring. We can decide not to decide, but that's a decision that has ramifications. So something that we need to integrate into the program schedule. Questions on that?
You said Cedar Pond is critical, but you didn't say what the plan is for that.
What-
You said that Cedar Pond is critical, but what's the, when is that going to tie into
Well,
this?
that's a good question. I haven't been myself directly involved in Cedar Pond, but the DEP produced a response to the MEP analysis where they made a recommendation. The DEP response, how can I say this, was
Cover your ears.
ambivalent. It was, yeah, that's a good idea, so it's been paraphrased. I didn't get the sense that it was a yes or a no, or you must or you can't. It was sort of left open. Now, I'm speaking out of place here. Others may know better about what the status of the Cedar Pond decision is.
It's my understanding that a decision was made, a management plan was developed, a management decision was made to reduce Cedar Pond to a low salinity system, and I believe that has the support of the selectmen, and that was what was decided. Unless something's happened
Okay.
that I'm not aware of,
Yeah.
that is the direction that Orleans has decided to go.
I apologize about that. I wasn't involved in that discussion. Whatever it is, there may be other thoughts or opinions about that. That's one of the key issues we need to address. We're not getting into it here, but that's something we do need to address. And how that fits with the other part of Rock Creek, because it has big influence on the actual downstream nitrogen requirements and other things. So, anything else? I want to go through a quick schematic. It's high-level schematic, but to show you some thinking about how we'll proceed. Today, planning workshop. This is sort of chartering, putting ground rules in place, talking about process, as Stacy said. August, we need to do an update, a revision of the needs. Why are we here, basically? We're here for nitrogen, we're here for ponds, we're here for Cedar Pond. What are the needs that we're talking about? What are the primary data sources? What are the conclusions we've reached to date? How certain are they? Where are the questions? Where are the uncertainties as we go forward? We have to do that, as it could be boring, or it could be extremely exciting. However, we have to do it. We have to struggle through that, because out of that will come things that could roll into, well, and we'll look at MEP, the CWMP basic information, Water Quality Task Force information, all kinds of other data can come in there. Not meant to be limiting here at all. We'll take that, look at it, and do a summary of the needs. But what happens, that's going to start informing what we call adaptive management. We're not going to have some data on some places. Some information's going to be questionable. Some information's going to be ambivalent. We don't have enough of it. Some of it's going to be old. So it's going to start informing what we call an adaptive process. A big part of it is monitoring. The other thing we need to do early on is look at the regulatory framework. Multiple aspects of this. There's regulatory aspects of new technologies coming along, whether they get, what the process is for them getting confirmed and usable. The Commission, again, in the analysis the last year, in its regulatory and institutional issues, legal and institutional issues subgroup, looked at different ways of moving wastewater planning forward without lumping it together and building a battleship out of it so that it can't move or can't turn. Targeted watershed management planning approach, where they have a way of taking pieces that are the right thing to do and moving them forward. So the adaptive management isn't like this, and what you do is like that. So this is a regulatory framework, not only from the bottom up, but from the top down here as we go forward. And that has to inform us all along the way. Initial alternative scenarios. One of the thoughts, and this is a good point of discussion we've had here, the typical wastewater planning program like this, oftentimes you have data collection, you have analysis, you have looking at alternatives, you go all the way. The alternatives doesn't come until 6, 7, 8 months of the program toward the end. When you get all this stuff together, you then put together alternatives. We've done a lot of the early steps. We have a lot of data. One thought that Stacy and I have had is taking the 208 scenarios and using them as the starting place, so that right away we're jumping in to scenarios that start forming our questions. Scenario X, Y, Z. If we're going to do X, what are the questions we have about that? What are the uncertainties? What's the data we need? How does this perform? What does this technology tell us about it? We're going to do Y. Well, same thing about that. And Z. So that over time, these alternatives are customized, modified, based on this input we get from the consultants and others, and we get these things taking shape, cost estimating on them and other things. And then, what I'm thinking is we say, okay, we have a non-traditional alternative, and I think the 208 program basically lays it out like this. You have non-traditional technologies. What if you were going to start from the green side completely and do everything from what you might call the bottom up? Innovative, alternative, new technologies, non-traditional technologies. What would that look like? Not just with nitrogen, although that's a big thing, but with all of the different needs that we find with regard to ponds and other things. That's one benchmark or bookmark, you might say. The other end, we look at traditional technologies. We say, okay, and maybe the CWMP is a reasonable starting place there. Maybe we already know enough to take the CWMP and say, okay, let's tweak that, change this, do that, and that becomes the traditional approach. And then in the middle, we all get together, put our minds together, start thinking and say, okay, let's take this from there, that from there, and put together a hybrid that takes the best from both of them. All of them are going to have questions, but then that starts informing our analysis, and we're working all the way toward a real solution as opposed to waiting to the end. Allows us to start doing some cost estimating, some financial analysis on what that option would really look like. If we're not going to have a plant at Tri-Town at all, why do a design, build, operate? If you're going to have a plant there, a design, build, operate is like, why not? So that starts informing the way we're looking at things. Comments on that right now. Think about it. We're talking to the Commission about getting together. Their plan is into EPA and DEP, and they're reviewing it now There's a lot of interaction, I know, between the agencies and the commission.
Right.
Patty, we're looking at getting together with the commission and them giving us secret information that we can use in the right way, that isn't really controversial, I wouldn't think, to start putting this in place, so we have something to build on that's consistent with the 208 going forward. So we're not taking off over here, and then in October, the 208 comes up, and we say, oh, well, let's go back and start over again. We don't want to do that.
I mean, we are in constant discussions with DEP and EPA now over the draft plan, doing chapter-by-chapter reviews with them, and hopefully we'll get their written comments by around the end of January. I'm sorry, July. July. But, I mean, I think you've fairly characterized the scenarios we've done so far, the non-traditional and traditional bookends, as we call them. And we will be sharing scenarios probably in a September timeframe. I'm hopeful that for this process, we can bring something maybe to the August meeting. So we're going to work to do that. It may just be Pleasant Bay.
Yeah.
It may not include Nauset at that point. But we're still talking through with our regulatory partners how these scenarios are developed and some of the finer details on that. So.
Well, your comment on August, that would be nice, but recognizing a lot of discussions are going on and it's complex, we did move it to September for that reason.
That'd be right in line with our timeframe.
Now, however, at that, even getting to that is going to be a challenge, because it's going to need some definition and some communication so that we can put it in a form that's workable for the town.
Ahead of time for your September meeting. Yeah.
So one of the things I would suggest is that because, they don't have to be perfect. We're going to make them perfect, right? We're going to take whatever you give us. It doesn't have to be nailed down, approved, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to take it with DEP at the table, with EPA at the table, and say, okay, let's now do this to it and do that to it, and really customize it to Orleans. So I don't think we're looking for that kind, and I hope there's some flexibility there, so.
Actually, that's the whole point. Our scenarios are only supposed to be illustrative of what the options on the table might look like. But it's our goal that each watershed or each town is going to make those their own and make decisions locally about how they want to proceed.
And the commission has offered the time of their staff and some of the consultants to help us through this process and workshops and stuff like that to make presentations to us. So we're looking at the September workshop as really the commission coming and saying, okay, here's our scenarios, and then we interface with them and react with them and start the process rolling with alternatives.
Hopefully our online tools, we can do some real-time discussions around what if we change that or this, or, what does that look like ultimately.
Right. And the financial model, too, we've been talking, I talked to Mark about that. We need some more discussions there about how what Orleans does financially can link and take advantage of the financial model that the Commission's put together. Gary?
Just a clarification. I'm hoping you're going to be sending us all the slides since the beginning.
It will be posted.
Posted.
We'll tell you exactly where.
Okay.
I'm going to try and get you all in the habit of going to the website, so instead of sending you stuff, I'm going to send you the links to the website.
Okay.
If anybody has
That's
trouble with that and needs help, let me know.
Okay. Including US slides as well?
All of it. All of this will be. Everything presented at meetings, all documents, all of it. It's going to go on the website.
Watch the subcategories, because there are some subcategories
And
there.
I'll walk through a little bit of that later, and then we'll be here to guide
So
you.
if we come to meetings, you bring your laptop, then there's Wi-Fi access right here, so we're going to have to print out 1 million pages.
It'll be fantastic. People are, if
Join
people are good with
the
that, we love
century.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
Mike, you've mentioned ponds. I think in Orleans, it's really important to define whether you're talking salt or freshwater when you talk ponds. In other towns, that might not even be
Mike, I'm a little uncomfortable with referring to what we have it coming out of 208 as scenarios. I think you were very clear that these are possible mixes, but as I understand it, unless it's changed, there has not been an effort as part of the 208 process to say, here's what we recommend as a solution for Pleasant Bay. So I don't believe we'll be starting with alternative scenarios that anybody in Orleans has said, yep, we think that's where we want to go. And I think I think you've been very clear throughout the entire process that you might do this, you might do this, but that we have not gone and said, we think this is a starting point for a scenario.
I don't disagree with that. I think that's right. I think that it's only a starting point, and even when it comes to this group, there's no imprimatur on it, no seal of approval, no recommendation tag or anything like that. It's a starting point, is really.
And
I don't even think it's that far.
Well, I think, Jim, the idea is, instead of saying, okay, here's our blank slate, everybody, what do you think? Instead of starting here, right, the idea is to say, well, here's the bookends that the commission started looking at. Let's start tweaking from here. So it's our starting point for tailoring rather than this being our starting point.
That wasn't how it was presented in the two. It was very clear. 208, they were very clear. For example, in the meeting, one of the meetings in Chatham, you proposed potential alternatives for Town Cove. You were clear there that no one in Orleans or Eastham were considering that as this is what we recommend. That wasn't reviewed, there wasn't involvement with the committee in terms of those specific alternatives. So I think it was illustrative of how to use the models. It was not portrayed as a starting point for the scenario of how we might address Town Cove.
Because some of those would not even be
Right.
feasible with the regulatory.
You may want
rules.
to, yeah.
Well, but I think this is the place we're going to get to that refinement.
I'm just nervous with saying that, as a very specific example, the scenario that was portrayed as Town Cove, I'm very nervous with saying that is the starting point for this conversation.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
I think this might just be semantics, but perhaps if rather than calling them scenarios, we simply call them options to pursue, that would basically say there's all this on the table, we want to look at these things, and some of these may or may not play out. But I mean, it may just be semantics,
Yes.
but I think that that's
That's right.
a better word than calling it a scenario.
And that's fine. Keep in mind, as you know, those of you who were involved in 208 and those of you who weren't, I don't believe it deals with Tri-Town.
No.
No.
It doesn't deal with ponds directly. It probably.
Correct.
So all of, right away, we have some major attachments to put on what they put out. What my understanding is that it gives you a more traditional approach, a more non-traditional approach, and the menus that go with it, and some preliminary analysis of what could go where, with like where PRBs could go and where aquaculture could go, and then some intermediate that we, as Stacy's saying, instead of a blank slate, we say this will be our alternative, tweaked, adding ponds, adding Tri-Town, et cetera. So
Maybe I'm completely incorrect. I do not believe, as part of 208, we said, here's where PRBs could go, or here's where aquaculture could go. We don't have that.
That's correct.
Okay.
But the 208 option suggests some possible places
Yes.
to
Yes, it does.
Absolutely.
put them, that the committee can then say, I'd like to investigate whether it might go there. Or you might say, I have no interest in looking at whether this can go there, because that's completely incompatible with what our community wants for that space, right? That's the level of bringing it down to earth that we have in mind. I know Brian's waiting.
To evaluate.
I think, kind of bringing together some of the things that you said, Mike, both in terms of the existing CWMP, what the other options would be.
You're on stage. Is this loud enough? I think in terms of what the other option, looking at what other options there would be, the existing CWMP did look at some alternative measures as interim steps. I think in particular it was specifying some decentralized treatment, but those would be the kinds of things, and again, what you were saying about going on parallel tracks or accelerating something, those might be the opportunities then to start looking at piloting in those areas while the other process continues. And it's not inconsistent with either the 208, nor is it inconsistent with what's already been approved, but it also will help inform decisions along the way.
Right. Earlier, I mentioned that we had moved this initial alternative, whatever we call it, to September, just for this reason, because we haven't seen the 208 in its final form, and there's going to be comments coming out of DEP and EPA on it. And we know, and one of the things we're going to have to do with GHD, and as a team here, is sit down with that, and probably starting, because we're not going to meet every week here, there'll be some work done behind the scenes with GHD to say, okay, here's the 208, here's a blank slate, here's the 208, here's some of the other options we had in CWMP. So let's take the 208 and add that kind of definition that you're talking about to get starting alternatives, or whatever we call them, so that there's going to have to be some work done to put those together. I didn't envision that they'd come out just the way we want them, as starting, traditional, non-traditional hybrid. There's going to have to be some kludging and some thinking done in what really could fly. So,
And just to remind you, we're functioning in a spirit of inventing options without committing, without even saying, hey, here's an idea, I don't even know if I like it, but let me put it out there because it might work, right? We're going to have to, just because it comes out as a starting point doesn't commit us to anything, right? So we want to just allow ourselves that space to be creative and draw from anything we can and throw it out, put it in, take it in, to move this, right? We're going to be doing a lot of that. We don't have to define anything at any, this is our starting point. This is what we're going to give ourselves that space, right?
I was just wondering if Jim, it would seem more comfortable to you if we just explicitly said that there are no options off the table, and these are not the only options we're going to consider in those scenarios.
To phrase it differently, I think it would be very useful in September to have potential straw man solutions as a starting point. I'm just saying that's not what we got out of 208. If somebody went and said, and maybe different ones, if in the in the upfront work, we said, here's something that I think we should consider, and maybe a straw man solution, non-traditional, to start that conversation, I think that would be very useful. I know that when we had this conversation in Chatham, I asked exactly this question, and the confirmation from Paul Niswicki was, we have what the scenario that was presented for Town Cove did not reflect any attempt to say this is what we believe should happen. It did not say we should have aquaculture here. It did not say, okay.
absolutely.
So it would be very useful to have a strong.
And by putting it on the table, we're not saying that either. We're not, if we did put something like it or modified from it, we're not saying that either. We're just picking up on what Stacy's saying is, we'll put something on the table before September, and this group will have a chance to say, let's tweak this, put that in, take this out. We may end up with 3 non-traditional options. This is why GHD is a little scratching the head. So this is a creative process.
Okay.
Importantly, though, one of the reasons we need to have Patty and the Commission at the table and DEP at the table is because down the road, that's who we're going to be going to. So it's absolutely critical that we link into whatever's there, whatever it is.
I completely agree. I think, Patty, I think we're on the same page on this, right?
Sounds like,
Good. Anything else, Gary?
Yeah, I just want to say, and I agree with you about what Paul said, but he also didn't say that those alternative ideas should be off the table.
Absolutely.
Right. So I just want, so we're talking options, and all options should be on the table.
Yes, absolutely.
Hi. I sat through a lot of the meetings that you had at a higher level at the county level, where you had all these senior scientists from all over the world. I think, Patty, you chaired these meetings. And they talked about, for many months, all the details, the technical details of all these options. And we all used to walk away from these things, and we never had any idea how it all fit together until one of the guys, I guess from ACOM, come up and he said, here, we're going to show you how the process works. And this is just a concept where they picked some place in Hyannis and they said, okay, this is a TMDL, and if you want, we can use different approaches to pick off and decrease the TMDL at every step of the way. And then everybody walked away from that meeting and they said, wow, now we understand what they're talking about.
Exactly.
And that's what the guys did when they came to the 208 meeting in December in Orleans when we were looking at the town code.
Yeah.
And they made it quite clear, this is not the plan that we're recommending.
it was
It's a
hypothetical.
conceptual approach to how you use these technologies.
That's what these three are.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'm going to I think we've captured most of the comments and concerns. We clearly are going to tread carefully as we approach how we do this. But again, we ask everybody to just take a deep breath, and we're going to approach this all with creativity, and we're going to talk more between now and then to make sure that we're bringing that in quite the right way.
I got to finish quickly, so I'm going to run through this. But this was probably the biggest point. October, from September, we're going to have these little tentacles that go out of information we need, studies we need, analysis we need of different types. The consultants are working on that. They're putting together technical memo, coming back, reporting to us in October. Financial model, we want to start early, as I said before, so that we're constantly recognizing the key critical financial parameters. We're going to come back, take those alternatives, scenarios, straw men, whatever we call them, come back November timeframe and say, okay, we've learned this about them. What would we change now? How would we tweak this? How would we change that? Is there a sub-option here we want to look at? How can we make this better? Add more value, reduce cost, based on the criteria you lay out. All of the time, as we go through all of these, when issues are unresolvable, we can't spend 3 workshops talking about them. We've got to define the issue, maybe even either charge GHD or me or somebody to say, how would we reduce or eliminate that uncertainty? What do we have to do it? That becomes a mini scope. When we act on it is a question, but we don't just throw stuff into an adaptive plan and say we're not going to consider it. We have a rationale, a process for resolving that uncertainty. It goes into the adaptive plan as a firm recommendation for something to do to reduce that uncertainty with a plan for how to factor it back in when we do. That's the flexibility part. Again, we're going to go out and say, okay, now we tweak these. What other questions are going to come up? What do we do about this? What do we do about that? What's the answer to this? Consultants, not that they stop working in between, they're going, but they're going to have another things they have to look at. Each one of these little tasks, this is important to tie into what Stacy said earlier about individual presentations. As we come to each one of these tasks, we'll have a goal, a scope of work, the questions that need to be answered, and get input on those scopes from the stakeholder group. So if you have additional information, if you have perspectives, if you have stuff, that's the time to put it in. That's the time to get it before GHD, before the stakeholders, so that it's addressed. When they come back and report, if they haven't addressed it, we'll be monitoring in the meantime, making sure they are. If they haven't, then we jump on them and tell them that get back to work. But that's the way we integrate questions and information as we go along. Come back again. Okay, hopefully this is a funnel going this way and not that way. Hopefully we're taking these options and tough process, whittling them down to the 3 or 2 that we want, hopefully maybe even 1, where we say we have one option, but we're not sure about this, and this. So let's now start focusing on that. We have a core that we're working with, and let's answer the questions about it so that come the next step, again, going into the adaptive plan, uncertainty, we sit down and say, okay, we all the way along we've been looking at the financial aspects of this, the cost aspects, the financial. We come back and say at the end, okay, now, is this meeting our goals? Is this something that we can sit here and say, I have what I need out of this? Not everything I want, but what I need. We have, as a community, what we need on this to go forward. Not necessarily the adaptive planning components, the ifs and what ifs in there, but the core plan, along with an adaptive component of it that answers the right questions going forward. That's where we start coming together. March, April, that's optimistic. David's laughing.
See, now this can work.
Yeah. But, you know, we have to push ourselves. If we set, you know, Boyle's Law, who knows Boyle's Law? Paul, you know it. Ed, what is it?
Volume and pressure and temperature are all interrelated.
That's right. I like to say it, the gas fills the space available to it. If we give it 2 years, it'll take 2 years. If we give it 3, it'll take 3.
Yep.
We have a lot of information. We have a lot of momentum. If we think, talk, communicate, work together, we can get the core of this thing in place in time for tri-town decisions, town meeting. There's still going to be a lot of buttoning up to do. There's still going to be questions out there, but consensus can be on the table so that we're now working on something we know about and we're perfecting rather than still dealing with straw men. And again, the adaptive management plan, the arrow's going the other way, is part of that plan. Mark, can we take...
Can you hold it or pass a note up? I want to move past this because
Yeah,
I want to
I gotta
get, you
move.
guys have been talked to for a long time here, and it's your turn, so I want
Yeah,
to...
let me just get through this. Adaptive management plan is integral part, major part of the final plan. Here's the possible workshop topics. I'm not going to go through it now. We have everything covered in there in some fashion or another. Some are categories of things, but along the way, workshops will not be generally one topic, number one. We may have to talk about financial, and then come back and say, okay, let's get a report on the step systems. We may want to talk about Tri-Town, and then we may want to talk about the site for the effluent from Tri-Town. So they'll be multifaceted. The other thing I wanted to say about the workshops, I forgot. But it's there, and they will be modified as we go forward. That schematic you had is a schematic. The real nuts and bolts are going to be in a Microsoft project framework, and you see the vertical lines. Those vertical lines are critical. For something to happen, something else has to be happening. We're still working on this. I'm working on it with GHD to put in place things like the Tri-Town decisions, things like when we need to know something about the landfill, when we need to have decisions on other pieces along the way here. If we have information from Nantucket, we want to know about it, so that all the way along, these vertical connections are going, and that drives our project, program, and stuff is feeding into the red dots, which are the workshops. Ed, would you allow Paul to speak for you?
Sure. I yield my time to Paul.
Paul's the actual rep, so.
Yeah.
Will we be able to get this in a format where we can break it down?
No way.
This is PowerPoint 101.d, We realize that. We will have it to you. I actually really tried to print this on my printer last night, and it just, because if I put it on a regular piece of paper, you still can't read it. So we got to get it printed big enough. Or if we give it to you in PDF, you can blow it up on your computer.
Yeah, I'll get it to you. And it may be that we want to have a 24 by 36, 48 by 72, that we can really use to see how stuff is fitting together, but you will, yes. Excuse me, Paul's not, I think he's, I can
Can
tell.
we get it in, what is this, Microsoft program?
Project.
Is the program going to be accessible? Then we could break it
If
up.
you have Microsoft Project, you can
Okay.
use it.
Yeah, that's great. I think Microsoft Project is an excellent tool, and I'm sure, as we've said, you'll have the contractor use the same tool. It's perfect. You can never get it on a computer, though. You need a great big piece of paper to do it, so don't try and do it on your computer. The other comment I would make, I went through all the tasks that you have in your statement of work, and I counted so many studies and inputs. I counted up to about 150 different tasks and studies and questions that have to be answered. And I'm sure you can put it all on a Microsoft Project worksheet. But the question is, if you look at our 4-hour meetings, and essentially what is left is only 9 months to go, you can't possibly squeeze them all into 9 meetings.
Yeah.
I'm asking a question whether or not you think we need more meetings to get all this stuff.
Well, good point. That's what I was going to say about, I forgot that point. The stakeholder, the workshop subjects I have, obviously, you can't do one a month because there's more workshops than there are months. Hopefully, with your concurrence and availability, we can have some interim workshops where we focus on financial, or we focus on design, build, operate, or to get those out of the way, so that when we do come to the broader workshops, when we're thinking and integrating, those are more productive. You're exactly right. One last comment, and I'll sit down. The S-curve. You all know the S-curve. You start off doing anything, and you don't make much progress for a while till you learn what you're doing and get everything in place. Then you start making great progress, and then there comes a point when you peak and you start going level again, and you can go on with no more productivity, no more benefit for endless amounts of time out there in that far end of the S-curve. In our discussions here, we want to get to the right point on the S-curve. We don't want to be making decisions down here when we don't know enough, when we haven't talked about it enough, we haven't synthesized it, we haven't dealt with the issues. We can't make decisions down at the bottom. But also, when we get up to the point where we have a good understanding, and Jason's uncertainty or risk is controllable, we need to move on. We can't spend, this isn't a scientific panel to do research. We have real water bodies that need to be fixed, and real solutions that have to be put in place, real benefits that have to come out of this, not just meetings and stuff like that. So we want to get up on that S-curve as fast as we can, talk about it productively, constructively, and then put it in place and move on. That's one of the goals we have to have with GHD, too, because we can spend a lot of money on consultants, all kinds of consultants, going out, way out on that S-curve unproductively. So, with that.
Thanks. All right. So, some of you may be desperately wanting a break. I usually don't schedule breaks for 3-hour meetings. You got to get to 4 hours before
I saw it was missing on the agenda.
Yes, 3-hour meetings, no time for a break.
Can't serve coffee.
But this is going to give you, if you wait and let me just explain this activity, then you'll be able to take your quick break during this activity. Okay? So, I want to talk about expectations and trying to identify what success looks like to all of you. So it's a little bit of a gamey way to do it, but what I want you to do is imagine we're at the end of this. We really accomplish all of these things. Maybe it's not June 2015. For now, we're going to say it is, right? And we have been wildly successful, right? So the newspaper is covering the success of our work, okay? What's it going to say? What's the headline, right? What's the headline? What's the sub-headline? If you want to get into sub-headlines, you know, you've got the big headline and the one underneath that says a little more. You might want more than one headline, right? But I want you to take these pieces of colored paper that are all around the perimeter here. There's a sticky side and there's a not sticky side. Right on the not sticky side so we can stick the sticky side. All right? And take up to 5. Try and limit yourself to 5. If you want just one and you want to get it in there in one, do it that way. So, and in between, while you're writing the headlines and you want to run to the bathroom or grab more coffee or donuts, you can do that. And then you're going to bring them and you're going to stick them up. Questions?
Just two. Thank you for the summary. As I look at that with the preliminary meeting plan, I note 3 public outreach sessions are listed. Are you going to say something about that?
Yep.
And then also,
Yep, sorry.
second is forming sub-working groups. Are you going to say something more about that?
Yeah. So we can talk about all those things. I'm going to table it for a minute.
Okay.
I'm going to move us on to this, and we'll come back to that when we get back to it.
Yeah, we have.
Okay? So, headlines of success, wild success, your greatest expectations met. Okay, what's the headline going to be? Write them down, stick them up, feel free to use them after.
I always wanted to be a headline writer.
Been reading about yourself today. You provide it.
Says Jason Sabine.
Yeah, I just came at me.
Just curious.
What is your thinking on the public outreach? How they go?
Thank you.
By the way,
That to me is my It's kind of like toilet paper.
So, it didn't like it, I guess, huh?
stick very well. No, just curious, since we're semi-partners in this,
That's the easy. Town goes on. Yeah. Let's see. Like a prototype. Or set standard. Portability. Wastewater standards or something. I agree.
You're the process. No.
This whole presentation would have been a way.
Give it to us so we can send it in here, because that'll help us have a bigger and more detailed.
That's cool, but if you're not doing that every day, it's very, very hard to see that. Are you still trapped, you know what?
Okay. Right time, we'll get Doug and you.
I was 17 years old when I first got 63 here. I had a very weird model for sitting there. It was called the Soy Top. Glass back windows. Of course, I was 17
I knew what I had.
Yeah, exactly. I still have dreams. Chuck. Oh, that'd be great. Now I actually have to.
Okay, so but it's not.
2010 Miata.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's your modern day.
Yeah. February, process like upstate New York, having to go to college. It's always in the car to get it started.
I remember that.
All right, anybody missing their headlines? Whenever I say headlines, I think when I was in high school, we had a little high school paper, and we called it the corduroy pillow, making headlines. There we go. All right.
I didn't even get it. I sat here going, what?
So I had originally thought I would take this, we would start synthesizing it right here on the spot, and then we'd move into developing some criteria for success. But we're of course short on time, so I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to do it after, and I'm going to send you guys. We're going to send you all of this, and then I'm also going to maybe take a first cut at trying to synthesize some criteria for success out of this.
Could you give us a couple of just...
But yeah, maybe I'll read a few of these. I mean, I think there's a number along the spirit of Orleans comes together to solve water quality problems, right? I think that's one sort of category. So it's voters approve it, we all agree on it, it solves water quality. I think we got a lot of that theme. Consensus is reached. We've got some that include Brewster and Eastham in the agreements. We've got some, we're ready to go with pilot projects. We've got new technologies in there. We've got business and growth opportunities. Miracle technology. Ooh, I like that.
Miracle.
Yeah, right.
Ooh, we've got a failure story. Somebody's vision of success is failure. I hope that's not really true. Does anyone want to say that was theirs and say something?
When we talk about all options.
Huh?
I wrote that, because
You wrote
that's an
failure?
option. Yeah, I did.
Okay, do you want to say what that means to you?
Read it.
Failure, another generation of Cape Codders fouls our waters.
Very simple. We've been dealing with this issue for 60 years, 2 to 3 generations, and we have not addressed it. And there's a danger that we might be the next generation that doesn't address something that's been around for a long time.
Yeah, so, and we're going to do that next. We're going to do the failure. Going optimism first.
Always precocious.
I'm going to put that to the next one, okay?
He was just ahead of us.
Yeah.
See.
That's this idea of wildly successful. I'm looking at his answer.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the general gist we have here, is we all agree, we move forward, we do that. I want to get us to the next level of depth from that, which is, aside from something we all agree on that cleans our waters, right? Those are, and that can pass muster and get approved and get implemented. What else, right? What else is there to success for you, right? And some of you went a little bit into some of those, but not a lot. So I want to elicit a little bit more of that. So can we do another round, maybe just go around, and if people want to offer up something that's really okay, what is it about this agreement that makes it successful, other than that it passes and it works? But what else? Is there more people can say about your hopes, your expectations? What would make you sign on to that agreement? Yeah.
Wide consensus.
Okay, we got wide consensus, right? We're all going for agreement. I'm thrilled to hear, and I think we all know we need that, right? So there's wide consensus. There's passed, by town meeting, by regulators, et cetera. And there's cleans the water. It's going to work, right? What else?
That whatever solutions are agreed on, that they support a vision for the future of the town in general. So that master planning vision for what we want to be as we develop.
Yeah, great.
Field divisions within the town.
Okay.
Understood by everyone.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to add one? I'm going to go around.
Yeah, the appreciation that nature can change the proper answer over time. One winter storm can change the whole equation for Pleasant Bay. It's some appreciation that what we're looking at, what we're addressing, is a snapshot in geologic time.
Okay, so flexible or adaptable to nature and change?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Holistic and sustainable, both economically and environmentally.
See, I think this exercise is really showing me the problem with journalism today. We just have the yay, and we don't get into the...
Supports the economic vitality of the town, it goes beyond with just cleaning the waters, making the town itself more attractive and useful.
Great.
I think we're all headed toward, or committed to coming up with solutions for a management plan that will improve water quality. But I think it's very important before, and everybody here is professional or in business or medicine or in science. And one thing that's pretty common, but to arrive at a consensus is to make sure there's a consensus on what the problem is. I think a very important thing to do right at the beginning is to make sure we all agree on what the problem or the problems are.
So, and I'm just going to frame it in terms of solution as that it solves the problem we all agree is the problem. Judith?
Solves the problem for today and tomorrow, both in terms of the extent of the problem and perhaps the various threats.
Great.
Well, I think affordability, it's part of others, but the affordability for all residents to continue to live in this town.
Yes, yes, you.
I was really gonna like leave if nobody's mentioned it. It's not funny.
Understands all the options.
When you say understands, you mean it
We
builds
have-
on the knowledge
Yeah.
from.
Similar to the affordability, but financing that's sensitive to young working families and the other end of the spectrum, seniors on fixed incomes.
Educates us collectively about the preciousness of water as a resource so that we can think in a new way about our options and stop using it in wasteful ways that are destructive.
Could I say foster stewardship?
I guess.
Nicely said.
Another twist on affordability, I would say that the voters will embrace the value of the investment being requested of them.
Great.
Creates jobs for the next generation of young people.
It's building on the sort of the affordability, it's perceived as being good value for money, and it is in fact good value for money, and the finances of the project and its operations are transparent.
Two. Yeah.
I would just like to add the word regional to Gary's wide consensus. I think we need to stay focused on this as a regional problem.
Compliant with federal, state, and local laws.
That's why we have them here, guys. That's why they're here.
I'd like to second a couple of them. Regional awareness of the necessity for stewardship, because Brewster needs to be thinking about the future as well. And they're starting to do that.
Can I say also that it creates sort of a role model, model for others?
I have to say the first thing that came into my mind was the attack emails stop.
Yes. Here. Attack emails.
Attack
Stop.
emails. We're going to say improves relationship.
Yes, of course.
I had written that the three towns all passed.
So if I had a spam.
Passed any kind of necessary funding and legislation, and to add to that, just that there are perhaps different socioeconomic situations, and so we have to be sensitive to that across the towns.
Yep.
It's a logical plan and it will function reliably.
Okay, I'm giving that two also. Anything important, critical that we missed here now on our list?
I have a long time thing that's been on my mind, understanding the value of water. I did a slide years ago for a presentation that basically had a can of Coke. I did a slide, the value of water. I did a slide years ago that had a can of Coke and what we pay for a can of Coke and what we pay for a bottle of milk and what we pay for a bottle of water and what we pay for gasoline and then what we pay for municipal or public water supply or public wastewater management. And all those are up here and we pay this down here. And that's not at all to diminish the need and concern for affordability about those less able to pay, but this is an incredibly valuable resource that we're talking about here. And we have to keep it in proportion to the other things in life that we value. Water is indispensable to everything we do, so.
That both the bodies that made the decision and the public understand the risks of doing or not doing what we chose to do.
And I love the addition piece about risk, because I think risk is going to be a really key thing, partly because we all have our own reactions to risk, right? And I think it's been one of the things that's been challenging for the town moving forward, to figure out what risks, there's risks in everything, but which risks do we like or do we feel okay about, and why, and what does that mean, and how do we balance that, right? Are there ways for us to put more risk burden of some areas on the people or institutions that feel most comfortable with that risk, so that we can separate ourselves from it while we're more willing to assume other risks? And can we really think and be creative about how we structure decisions, decision makers, implementation, to be attentive to people's differential responses to different kinds of risks. So I think that's a great thing to have in there. Okay, so now we're going to very quickly give you a chance to do failure, right? So this is an exercise. Alan, excuse, we already did it.
They'll be down already there.
But aside from just repeating the inverse of all these, we didn't understand the risks. I mean, you can highlight them again if you think it's important. We can turn all of these into reasons we failed. But if you really think about if this thing messes up, what's your biggest fear about where we're going to go off the rails here? Right? What are we going to do wrong? Right? This is our pre-mortem. Instead of waiting till the end and looking back at what we did wrong, let's try to figure out what those things are, those pitfalls that we might fall into. Let's try and figure them out now so we can avoid them. Right? So talk to the person next to you. Think about a couple of things that are most concerning to you, your biggest fears, that we all should sort of keep top of mind and make sure we're attending to so we don't fall down those holes. Okay, so take a minute or two, talk to the person next to you, and then we're gonna hear your top ideas.
Region impacts the together.
What that means? Same shit.
Oh, I love sit inside it.
Which for me means that, and I think really address the process to
Get past the hurdle.
Well,
Then it's
you
no
know, it's a
longer
nice idea, but it doesn't meet
It's
all our
big sewer.
requirements.
So you should have
That's always been
historic statement.
Right, so maybe that's the definition of the
What's this?
somehow
We've already signed it. We've signed it.
My 8-year-old grandson.
You know, the last vote this year is like 98%. So I think the elephant in the room is honestly getting the escape fully off the table, getting a centralized system off the table, everything else will fall. I think if people still think that the original plan is the only plan that we can do, it will be broken again. It won't pass. It won't pass my way.
I think you're right in what you say. I also still think, because this is what happened 30 years ago, is people just didn't want to pay for it. They talked about doing downtown sewers, and the residents didn't want to pay for downtown sewers. If they had back then, probably Town Cove wouldn't be as bad a shape. Although, in reality, everybody said this is contributing to it.
I think people have come around and have now, that would be very disappointing for me, and for a lot of people who I know on my side, that let's take us off the table, and we have more, but we do the things we have to do, including sewer downtown, centralized system of sewer around Meeting House Pond and other areas that are in distress, and we put in these towns.
I think that's the most realistic.
I have.
Talked about the first round we had is selling this to
Let's try this one
That's why
more
if we can
popcorn
reach a
style.
consensus,
Anybody
like
wants
so
to throw out what went wrong and why?
So this obviously coming from the Finance Committee, but I think, I could be wrong on this, but I think the single biggest reason this has a chance of failure is if somebody gets up at town meeting and says, this is going to cost $100 million, and sits down. We need to be able to, both among ourselves as well as with the town, say, this is what it's going to cost, this is how we know what it's going to cost, and then pretty much on a line-by-line basis, tell everyone and generate a really good understanding of why it's going to cost, what it's going to cost, and make people understand that it's both affordable and necessary, but that the finances of it are transparent. Because, I mean, 2 years ago, when John Hodgson got up in front of town meeting and said, this is going to cost $250 million. Whether he was right or wrong, I don't really know, but that ended the debate.
Okay. Speaking to that, it's public education.
Yes.
So that, and it's also not chasing the way out naysayers. It's making sure that the people who need to know, and that they understand they understand that the person who stands up at town meeting and says, they can sit and look at their neighbor and say, well, that's not really true.
Right. And I'm going to frame it as, if this is okay, that we would fail if we don't reach out beyond this room.
Right.
If we don't engage and involve people beyond this room.
Yeah, to add to what Joshua said, I think you'll also look at the cost of not doing something. So what's it going to potentially cost them if we don't do anything? Okay, they don't think it's going to cost them anything. Well, it's going to cost them huge if we don't do anything.
That's right.
I'm just going to add to this one. And I think it's going to become increasingly clear that doing nothing is not going to fly.
Just back to what Sue was saying, I think it will come from education perhaps, but it's not so much education as it's belief. That's the concern. It's getting the public to believe, not just be educated in it, but to actually believe or buy it.
Yeah. And I'm going to put that as trust, too. Right? We got to build, we're going to work hard to build trust in this room and in this process. And those of you who went through the 208, that helped set a good starting point for that, I think. And we're going to need to all be emissaries to help build that trust outside of this room as well. Kim?
I think what it's going to take is the path that we've been on in the last 8 months, which is getting both the Board of Selectmen at a 5-0-0 affirmation, and getting this group of stakeholders at a 10-0-0, I think that's how many actual stakeholders are, affirmation to a plan. And there are a couple of elephants in the room, and big central system, Namskakit Marsh, doing nothing. having, failure that we have to come to terms with.
So if we fail to come together, be able to reach consensus, either this group or the...
But if this group can come forward and the board comes forward with that kind of affirmation, along with, the education piece as to why this board has come together, I think we'll have a very positive result like we did at this past town meeting, where the warrants passed by a wide vote.
Okay, you're asking for failure modes.
Yes, why?
I think failure that I am concerned with is we go through a lot of engineering studies and biological studies and geological studies, and we come up with a great plan, and the regulators say no. That's my concern.
We're not going to let that happen.
That's why we have them here. We're going to try and keep them here, but them being here, they can tell us their views, they can help direct us, but they've got other layers as well, so we have to really have other conversations and be making sure we're engaging on those levels all throughout as we go.
A clear understanding by this group that we do seriously and sincerely buy into the consensus understanding and what it means to stand aside, but that does not then turn into a negative blocking with the public. But stand aside is what it is as we come to consensus, almost establishing a covenant among ourselves that we'll live by that.
Right, so I've had other protocols where I've actually said that if you, when I have really official representatives, if you sign on to the consensus in this group, you actually commit yourself to be an advocate for this outcome, right? Even if you have stood aside and said, I'm not going to block consensus because it's probably the best we're going to get to here, but I don't love it. I really don't love it. It'd be great if people wanted to then say, I'm willing to commit to, if not at least being an advocate, at least not being someone going out to rally people to vote against this thing, right? That's just not going to work. You guys are here as representatives of constituencies, as formal or informal as they might be. You are influential people in your communities, right? And we have to rely on that. So I think that's a nice point to bring up. Anything else? What else? What else are your fears? Are people afraid to say, or are they the inverse of these things?
Something about reframing the whole idea of waste treatment and waste removal, the sort of denial that is associated with that. What are we doing with water as a resource that deserves enrichment? It's a whole kind of reframing of the way we're trying to approach the issue, and I won't even call it the problem. Because every time it is looked at that way, there's a kind of blind spot that we knock our heads against.
What if I call this, since I'm writing failures,
yeah.
it's a failure to reframe the issue in a way that's going to gain support from the public? All right, I'll open it up. Yes, others.
So I see this whole beautiful 208 wastewater plan as, lack of a better words, please hold on, a Band-Aid for an underlining issue. We have
What did you say?
A Band-Aid for an
Band-Aid.
underlining issue. We have nitrogen and phosphorus, excessive amounts continuing equals a problem, so we're creating a solution. We have the solution, it is up and running, it's implemented, it's 2020, and it's ongoing and running, and everything is happy day. If the failure and possibility, if we do not continue to lessen our impact of the underlying issue, the nitrogen and the phosphorus, if we continue to overpopulate, have tourists coming in the summertime, how big does our Band-Aid get? How big is this ship really, like, it keeps growing and growing. We've got to have the funnel effect continue.
Okay, and can I say the solution doesn't encompass the long-term problem or the long-term situation?
Time.
Right, that would be a failure. It's an interesting thing, because often I help groups come together and agree on something, and then I go home, and I sometimes will call someone up 5 years later and be like, hey, I'm just curious, how's this thing going? Right, and everybody celebrated, we got it, we agreed, but 5 years later, I feel like we failed if it hasn't been implemented or if it's not doing its job, right? And I think we all should feel that way. That our goal isn't just we make an agreement, we get it implemented, but that 10 years later, we can look back and go, yeah, we did a great job. We can still say, we might have had, it's not perfect, but we've set in motion the ways to do the self-correcting, to come back and revisit and monitor and make sure that we're really getting where we want to go.
How about a loss of self-determination? Unable to reach a solution and have one imposed on us? Yes. And we won't mention by who. But I think that has been a concern all along.
Yeah. I'll come to you in a second.
I think the fact that, and this goes to some of the prior comments, that the longer we put this off, the less people remember what good water quality looks like and what our oceans are supposed to be like.
What if I call that public acceptance of low water quality?
Yeah, we could.
Actually, NPR did a great thing yesterday about air quality in Beijing. They talked about that.
Right. It's like, yeah, we all just wear masks. That's how it is around here.
Frog in the boiling pot.
Something like that.
I had trouble with this because, for me, failure is not an option. And we must find a way now to work through this. This is the opportunity now to do it. So I don't want to even consider failure for me personally. But I do have fears that decisions will still be driven by misinformation. And my biggest fear is that water quality will continue to decline, real estate values will plummet, people will move away from Orleans, Eastham, and Brewster because we failed to reverse the environmental damage that we, humans, caused when we had the power to do it, to change it.
And we're going to work on some of these terms that may set off flags for people, though they have meaning as well. And we may not all share the same meanings, but I think misinformation is one of those, given the idea of it's not just information, it's one person's information is someone else's misinformation, and how do we find which is which? That's something we're all going to try and work out together. More at the table.
I know it's not our scope, but I want to mirror what this young lady said, and my feelings through the first round of the two-way process that I sat in on is that and I think what I'm talking about is future failure, but we talked about doing things that are affordable first and doing things just enough to meet the DEP mandates, and that may not necessarily really take care of the longer-term issues that will develop even further down the road.
All right, and what I can say now, so maybe our low-hanging success could actually prevent or preclude or slow down our long-term success. So we want to keep an eye on getting going when we can, right? But we don't want that to make us feel like we're done.
But yeah, just don't stop. It's going to be it should be a forever thing.
I think, failure to me is, not succeeding. And I think the issue, or one of my fears, is we don't define what success means carefully. How do you know you've succeeded? Because we have to go back and justify additional steps, additional phases, whatever you want to call it. So what really is success in this? We have to be very careful on what that is, because truthfully, and I would hate to be part of a Board of Selectmen that's 10 years from now, people look back and say, well, that Board of Selectmen went through $100 million and they didn't succeed. What is success?
And I think when we get into definitions of success, it's also something we're going to need to hold multiple things at once, because we're kidding ourselves if we think we're all going to walk away with the exact same definition of success, right? It's not going to happen. What we want is everybody's definitions of success, sort of cumulative